Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to do a video on table saw safety. So if you've ever wanted to get into woodworking, or you're currently a woodworker, you're not comfortable with the saw, or you want to learn up a little bit before you use it to make sure you're being as safe as possible, this is the video for you. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, quick disclaimer, your safety is your responsibility. I'm going to provide you some tips on how I try to stay safe, some of which I don't practice what I preach, but we'll go through that. But you need to take responsibility for your own safety. If it seems sketchy, it probably is. So take a little bit of care, use a little bit of common sense.
Safety and common sense.
Pay attention to what's going on around you. And with all that said, let's get straight into some tips. Don't have anything on or near the blade when you start up the saw. This seems obvious, but I think it should be talked about just for a second. Even if you don't have anything directly touching the blade, papers or anything light near the blade can be picked up by the blade because it creates a little bit of wind and it can pull that towards it and then create some damage, or even a piece of paper, if it chucks it at you fast enough, can get you a pretty nasty cut. So just make sure there's nothing on or around the blade when you start it up, and you should be good to go there. The second tip, don't put these 10 little sausages near the blade. The closer you are to the blade, the more likely you are to get cut. Now, yes, you can pay attention. In a lot of my videos, you'll actually see me running a fairly thin board through like this. That is because I am comfortable with what I'm doing. I'm taking my own safety into my own hands. If we're talking pure safety here, it is not a very safe practice. What I should be doing is using a push stick on that particular scenario. So whether or not you have 8 little sausages or 11, you don't want to lose those here because you miscalculated something, or you didn't pay attention and you got a little too close to the blade. So keep those fingers away, and let's move on to the next one. Tip number 3, don't wear baggy shirts, sweatshirts, or anything that has strings that hang down. There's a very good likelihood that when you lean over to push a board through here, you are going to catch that string in there, or you're going to get too close and your baggy sleeve is going to catch the blade, and it will waste no time pulling your body parts into that blade.
I'm bleeding!
I've never seen anybody that's lost an arm or anything, but you'd be very surprised how quickly somebody can, again, snatch a finger off just because it caught a little piece of your clothes and ripped you in towards the blade. So no baggy clothes, no hanging strings. If you got strings on something and everything else isn't baggy, tie them up, put them inside your shirt, whatever you got to do. And that wraps it up for that one. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, tip number 4. If it's wider than it is long, probably don't put it in.
That's what she said.
No, this is not a bedroom statement. This has to do with feeding sheets through your table saw, sheets or even boards. And this is more prevalent the narrower of cut you're making. So this board here, I believe, is like 30 inches wide. And if I put it in long ways, that's a safe cut because there's less, it's narrower than it is long. So you're not going to create a binding situation. However, if I turn it sideways, if your board is wider than it is long, and your cut is narrower than the halfway point, you've now created a good likelihood that you're going to create a binding situation. Best case scenario, you can correct it and push it the rest of the way through. Worst case scenario, it catches the blade and it chucks that board back at you. So, like I said in the beginning, if it's wider than it is long, depending on the cut, it's likely not a safe cut. So If it is wider than it is long, you need to be cutting near the center point before that becomes a relatively safe cut to make here. Tip number 5, use the riving knife whenever possible. Some saws don't have them, but if your saw has one installed or can take a riving knife, put that on there. There's also one that I used to use for an old contractor saw. I forget the name of it. I think it's by Micro Jig. But you can make a new plate for your saw, and then there's little inserts to give you that riving knife type of action on there. The riving knife itself provides one function, and that's to keep the board from squeezing and pinching on the blade as it's spinning. If the board pinches on the blade when it's spinning, there's a possibility it's going to kick that board back at you. The likelihood of that occurring is more prevalent with thicker woods and pressure treated lumber, just because they have more stresses in the wood from the size and the treatment process. So to prevent that, I do recommend using a riving knife whenever you can. I use it for basically every cut that I make. I just leave it on there, and it's saved me a lot of headaches, I'm sure. Tip number 6 is to use a blade guard and anti-kickback whenever possible. Now, I am going to go ahead and confess here, I never use these.
Oh, what a hypocrite!
Should I? Yes. In my case, I find it difficult to get these on and off, and they tend to get in the way. The kickbacks themselves actually do sometimes create grooves in wood where you don't want them. But they both together, they serve some critical functions that help keep you safe, especially if you're not comfortable with the saw yet. First, the blade guard covers the blade, so you're less likely to accidentally come in and touch the blade with your hand or unintentionally bump something into a moving blade that you did not want to. They only lift up when you bring wood or material underneath. Secondly, once you get the wood past the blade guard, they will engage these anti-kickback strips, and they're spring-loaded, so they stay down on the wood, but they help to, this is what kind of digs into the wood. On thin plywood, it doesn't work very well, but what they do is when they engage, they help prevent the wood from coming back towards you. So in the earlier steps where I said that there was a lot of chances for kickback, this basically counteracts that by preventing the board from going back the other direction. This particular piece of wood is not a good example of that. Again, whenever possible, I would say this is a good idea to use. I'm probably myself still going to just be careful without them.
How dare you?
Just because I can't get it on and off easily, and there's a lot of cuts you can't make with these on there. So take that with a grain of salt. But again, if you can use it, you probably should. Tip number 7, always keep your workpiece against the fence, all the way against the fence, not kind of however close you can get it, all the way against the fence. This is one of the easiest ways to prevent the kickback that we've been talking about, which is one of the bigger problems with table saws, is that there's a lot of situations where you can create kickback. So by keeping the board flat against the fence, you can help reduce the likelihood that this gets kicked out a little bit and catches the blade and kicks back at you. On the back side of the cut, if you have that riving knife, that should prevent it on the off-cut side, but it doesn't prevent you still from like getting this a little off. And this is probably more frequent if you've got a large piece of lumber that's a little cumbersome to manage on your own. You could, when you're bringing a sheet of plywood through here, you could accidentally do one of these, which on a large sheet of plywood is very easy to do. Even if the fence is tight and the riving knife is in there, you can still move it. So that would be one of the best ways to prevent that kickback. And honestly, it'll give you a straighter cut, which is better for the end product, right? So let's move on to the last one. Tip number 8. Pay attention. And I don't mean that in a condescending way. I mean it in a very sincere way. I am also guilty of not paying attention when I should have. Accidents do happen. We are human. And they are sometimes more likely to occur based off the actions we take. If you didn't catch my last video, the Cat Mansion video, you can catch that up here. But in that video, I was putting on a side panel and the bit that I was using, a square bit, slipped off the screw. I had my finger too close to the area where I was drilling, or I was driving the screw into, and the square bit drilled right into my finger, left a pretty nasty hole, and bled out pretty good. So accidents are part of the job, but the idea behind this video is to create more safe situations. That way, when an accident does occur, it's a scrape or a bruise instead of, oh, a missing finger, or like, I just came out of a Jeepers Creepers movie and my eyes are gone. So all that said, let's wrap it up. One final tip that I just remembered, it should have been one of the first ones. Always use a push stick whenever you can. Push sticks help keep your hands away from the moving blade. They also provide the correct amount of support if you place them in the right area to keep the board moving past the blade instead of binding the workpiece as you're moving it through. Now the push stick is only really needed at the tail end of the cut. You can use your hands as you're pushing the material through. As you come to the end of the cut, you'll want to use a push stick, push block, anything like that to kind of save your hands from that potential danger. Okay, that's going to wrap it up for today. Hopefully you got some tips and tricks. Hopefully I was able to reduce some of the anxiety you might have had towards working with your table saw if you're just getting started, or give you some tips that you hadn't thought about to make your experience more safe if you are currently using a table saw. So with all that said, if you liked it or got any value out of that at all, I would appreciate a thumbs up. It really does help the channel grow. Other than that, we'll catch you on the next one.